Hi there, it's Alexandra from the Middlesized Garden YouTube channel and blog, and it's the March garden tour. And I've been finding out more about what to do about my daffodils after they've finished flowering. And I've been cutting back the Stipa, the Mexican feathergrass, and also the cornus. So I hope there'll be some helpful tips there. But first, the weather. It's been really wet, and there have been some sunny days with temperatures sort of 10, 15 Celsius, which is like 50, 60 Fahrenheit. So, not freezing cold, but then suddenly overnight there'll be a frost. So plants are budding, and in fact most of them are surviving these very light frosts, but I think there are a few that are getting a few unpleasant surprises. There have been a few questions in the comments about which USDA hardiness zone we're in, because sometimes I say we're in 9 and sometimes I have said we're in 8. I think we're closer to 9. Certainly the United States Department of Agriculture hardiness zones are the most widely used in the world, and they're about how a plant survives with the temperatures in winter. So they really are relevant when it comes to thinking about, is this plant going to survive in my garden over my particular winter? But doesn't really relate to the weather here in southeast England. We don't actually get usually as hot as that in the summer. But equally, even people who are properly in a hardiness zone that's pretty consistent, the weather, is the weather ever consistent? I don't think so. So even then, you actually have a lot of other variables that will affect which plants will do well in your garden. And the most important of these is the microclimate. And your microclimate is whether you're in a frost pocket or whether your garden faces north, or whether you're particularly sheltered or particularly sunny. And all of these, if you're close to the sea, you won't get a frost so often. If you're up even quite a little hill, you can get slightly colder temperatures. And one of the big things that really affects my garden is how close the plants are to the house. And I have got in a pot a begonia sharfii, which is basically a zone 10 plant. It cannot deal with any form of freezing, and I accidentally left it out there. I went out a few weeks ago and thought, oh, I should have put that inside, but I looked at it and it's fine. I wouldn't say it's really happy, but it is fine, and that's because it's in a pot really close to the walls of the house, and we've had central heating on throughout the winter, and it's been a mild winter. So that bit of my terrace is effectively a zone 10. Of course, we could get a nasty surprise. We could get a week of snow. And I have actually wrapped some horticultural fleece around the roots now. But it is interesting that actually you really have to do a bit of trial and error, because some plants may survive in your garden which shouldn't, and indeed some plants may die which should survive. And the great comfort is that every plant expert and fantastic gardener I have ever spoken to says, oh, I've killed thousands of plants. So for us amateurs, I think we can feel not too bad about killing plants, although it would be nice not to. I recently went to talk on daffodils at my local garden club, the Painters Forstall Garden Club, and expert Janine Dalton told us all about what judges look for in daffodils, which isn't really my particular area, but it is interesting to look at the shapes of daffodils, and it makes it very interesting walking around the streets at the moment, because you have to think about things like whether the trumpet or the cup is longer than the petals or shorter than the petals. Is it contrasting with the petals? Does the daffodil face stick straight out, or does it droop naturally? And how is the pattern of the petals? And somebody came in with a bunch of daffodils in a jug, and she said, oh, that's lovely, you've got some great heritage varieties there. And the person who'd cut the daffodils, I don't think they particularly grow heritage daffodils, that's just what was in their garden. So I realised, looking around my garden, I haven't really planted many daffodils. I planted some paper white narcissi, and by the way, narcissi and daffodils are exactly the same. You can't say, oh, I hate daffodils but I love narcissi, because they are all narcissi. But I've never really planted very many daffodils, and yet I have got a lot of different ones in my garden, so they must have been planted by my predecessors, which means they could be anything from about 25 to about 75 years old, which makes you realise that daffodils actually are hugely valuable in a spring garden, because they just sort of sit there and come back. And I just discovered about a dozen different varieties of daffodil in my garden. Janine Dalton said, when you deadhead daffodils after the flower's gone over, just snip the head off, don't take the whole stem, because that's got nutrition for the bulb. And also that daffodils like water. They don't want to sit somewhere damp, so make sure that they're not sitting in a damp thing, but they do need quite a lot of watering, and they do need quite a lot of watering in the 6 weeks after they've flowered, because that's when the bulb is going to get the nutrition for next year. She says you don't have to feed daffodils if you planted them a year or so ago, but once they've been in the ground for a few years, they might appreciate some food, or obviously if you mulch your borders regularly, that's a good thing. Don't tie up the leaves at all, and don't cut them back until 6 weeks after they've flowered. So that of course means you've got messy leaves sitting around, and Janine said actually that's why daffodils work very well in a mixed border, because as their leaves die back and start to look messy, you actually find that the other plants, such as the alliums in my case, are taking over. The other thing I'm doing this month is cutting back some of my grasses, because I like to have them for the winter garden. And particularly I've been growing a grass called Stipa tenuissima, or Mexican feather grass, or ponytail grass, in the garden for about 3 years. And because I've been a bit confused about what to do with it, I actually haven't done anything with it. And so I really looked into this, and I've looked up quite a lot of experts and talked to quite a lot of people, and actually it is a bit confusing, so I don't feel too bad about this. The stipas generally can be evergreen or deciduous, and Stipa tenuissima is actually deciduous, which means that its leaves die in the winter. But of course, actually they stay on. So I've had this lovely brown grass waving throughout the winter. It's not an evergreen, the grass has died, but then it starts to come through in the spring. There's a lot of different advice on when you should cut it back. Some people say January, some people say March, so I assume February would be just as good as well. But certainly I need to cut it back now. And there's also conflicting advice on whether you actually just stroke out the dead grasses with your hands as if you were combing your hair, or whether you actually cut it all back to the ground. And I started by combing it out, and actually, to be totally honest, I got a bit bored. So I decided to cut it to the ground, because I wasn't getting a lot out of it. So anyway, when you cut it to the ground, the important thing is to cut it right down as close to the ground as you can with your secateurs, because the cut bits of grass won't grow. So you will have a sort of, you will notice them if you don't cut them right close. So I got stuck in there and I started cutting round the edges close to the ground, and then I discovered that there was loads and loads and loads of dead grass from the 2 previous years. So I really managed to get a lot of that out. But once I cleared that out, there was some really nice kind of fresh green grass in the centre, so I decided to leave that. So I have actually both cut it back and combed it through, and maybe that's going to work for me. I'm perfectly happy with it now. So once again, I think this is very much about what suits you, what suits your garden, how long it's been since you actually did anything with your Mexican feather grass, and so on. I've also been cutting back the cornus, and cornus is beautiful stalks. They are part of the winter garden. They're absolutely beautiful, and you usually cut them right down to just a few inches above the ground. When I visited Great Dixter a few years ago, they said they shaped it so that they have, some of the cornus will be about sort of 8 or 9 inches above the ground, some of it will be just cut back to about 3 inches above the ground, so that there's a shape. And I did try this with my cornus midwinter fire, but it has come out a bit the way I've done it. It has come out a little bit crossed and not a beautiful shape. So this year I'm cutting it all back to just a few inches above the ground, and I think that might look better when the stems come back. But obviously I'll show you in the winter tours later on this year. I've also been potting up my dahlias. Now, I used to not dig up my dahlias, but I left them in for too long. The dahlias seem to do fine if you leave them in for a couple of years, but I had left some of these in for 10 years or more, and by then they had really started to just spread and to slightly revert to wild, I think, or to something rather uninteresting. So I dug all my dahlias up last winter, and I'm now potting up the ones I want. And if you pot up dahlias in March, you then get them a bit further ahead for when you plant them out in May. You need to obviously plant them out after the last frosts have gone. I'm using a peat-free compost. It's New Horizon by Westland, which they gave me, and I have now subsequently bought some. The issue of peat in compost is probably one of the biggest environmental issues that we gardeners have to deal with. So I've been talking to my gardening friends around the world, and in Australia, horticulturalist and broadcaster Stephen Ryan says, we Australians, we don't use peat in our compost. We don't have peat naturally in Australia, and we don't import it. So what's the problem? We just don't use it. When I spoke to Erin of the Impatient Gardener YouTube channel, she said, well, in the States, pretty much all the compost has got peat in it. We're really given very little choice if we want a peat-free compost. We're halfway between the two here in the UK, where there is a growing number of peat-free brands, but the majority of the compost in the garden centres is not labelled peat-free, and if it's not labelled peat-free, it pretty definitely has peat. And also organic is meaningless in this context. Now, the peat bogs occupy about 3% of British land, but they hold more carbon than actually all our major forests put together. And when the peat is dug up, that carbon is released into the atmosphere. So if you are looking at reducing carbon in the environment, not digging up peat is absolutely critical to that. It's also a habitat for a lot of rare flora and fauna, so we are losing a very important habitat. And it's not necessary. The RHS says no gardener should need to use peat. However, if we don't have peat-free composts available in our garden centres, then what can we do? I think this is something that we as gardeners have to drive forward. We have to ask for peat-free composts, and we have to write to companies, and if there's a peat-free compost there, let's buy it. So let me know what you think about that issue and how it is in your part of the world. There's links in the description below to the peat-free compost companies and also to Stephen Ryan and to the Impatient Gardener YouTube channel. And do let me know if there's anything you'd like me to cover in future videos. And if you'd like tips, ideas and inspiration for your middle-sized garden, then do subscribe to the Middlesized Garden YouTube channel. Thank you for watching and goodbye.